point. And so we're going to go ahead and walk through installing both the server services and the client services. These are the complete installers for all of the add-ons. These do not include the MedInformatix application server or MedInformatix client installs. Those will not be released for examination or potential use until we get 7.7.3.0 out the door. So we're going to start with our server services. And just to confirm, I'm going to bring up our services control panel here and just scroll down and make sure in the MedInformatix area that none of the services that I want are installed. And scanning through here, I can see that they aren't. No Waystar, no New Crop, no SQL Client, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and close that here and run the server services installer to minimize that. So this is, I think I've shown this at least once to you all in an informal setting. This is just like the individual services installers, except that they're all included, and we have options for all of the back-end services that we might install on an application server. The connection manager is a required component, so I can't turn that off. Everything below this is optional. In today's case, I'm going to go ahead and select, make sure everything is selected, and everything is selected by default. I've got a 4K monitor here, so these little controls here are very tiny and hard to see, but when you click on them, it shows you the options that you have. So, and it defaults to will be installed on local hard drive. If you don't want to include it, you would do entire feature will be unavailable. So just to review what these are real quick, the connection manager is the service that many of these services use to read MedInformatix environment information, from your MedInfo config folder, basically, and make connections to the database and the environment. So we have one service that handles all that instead of each of these individual services having its own individual connection info to the application server. Good ID integration is the implantable device integration. IMO is the intelligent medical objects, ICD-10 and associated SNOMED lookup service. New Crop should be self-explanatory. We've got the New Crop RX server and the New Crop task server. These go hand in hand. Previously, the New Crop RX renewal service was a standalone, but that was rolled into the task server. So the New Crop task server handles everything that's not a prescription. It handles the status checks of prescriptions. It handles notifying a user that a prescription failed, through messages. It handles the RX renewal queries. It handles everything that happens basically after a prescription is routed through the New Crop RX server. So it's a companion to the RX server, and it's basically required. Well, I say required. It's actually not, but you should. The task server should be installed anytime you're installing the RX server. They go hand in hand. Remote SQL is what we're looking at today. So Remote SQL is the name of the server-side service. I would still like to bring the names of these together so that they are it's clear that Remote SQL and SQL call are related. But the server side is called Remote SQL. We have the SQL REST server. Now it's different from Remote SQL. It's the SQL REST server is used by a variety of applications we've been developing here. And some of you out there, Patrick, you were the first one to leverage the SQL REST server to use it to dynamically query data into your HTML clipboards that you all use.
Yeah, for the MIPS.
Yeah, right. And we do have that as a SQL REST server as a one of our future training reviews. And Patrick, I'll just let you know, and I'm going to ask eInformatics if Jesse can participate. But I would love for you all to be able to demonstrate how you've used it. Maybe just give us a peek at the JavaScript you've written to use it, just to expose the general group here to how it can be leveraged and where.
Okay. Rebecca did all the hard work for the MIPS stuff.
Nice of you to compliment her.
He's just buttering me up.
Right, exactly. He's going to be asking you for something big later today, I'm sure. So, all right, and then last but not least is the Waystar server. So that's the service that replaced that. It's just the Zermed service renamed, and that the Waystar service, which I'm going to guess none of you are using, and we had talked about at the VAR meeting. I'd said Nick Neesett at eInformatics had identified what we think is a bug with it, and Jerry Harrell was going to confirm, but I think Jerry's been having his own problems trying to get it installed. But anyways, the purpose of this is to move away from Zermed redirect.exe and use a service, a server-based service for all the communications to the Waystar API, using internal browsers to the MedInformatix client instead of popping IE windows up all over the place, which is always bad form, but it worked for the most part with our hands-free integration over the years. All right.
Hey, Chris, just
yes.
one quick question. If Jerry is not on your list to add access to the new box share, can you get him added to that?
I can, and he is on that list because he asked me for it. But that's a good question. Let's we're digressing, but let's go back and review who's on the current list. And I'll just run. I've got a list of everybody who's on there in here. We'll take a look at that, and if you all need me to add anybody to it, then I'll jot those names down. All right. There we go. All right. Here is our current list. I'll just read the names out loud, and then you all can comment afterwards. Sorry for the digression here from the installation.
It's my fault.
It's my fault. It's all right. Myself, Mr. McClure, Spencer here at the office, Jesse at eInformatics, Scarlett, Don Hembry, Patrick, Kyle here at the office, John Krivak, Eric Plaxon, Phil Toon, all of eInformatics, Chris Lassley, Janet Barbosa, Nathan Young, Jordan Current at eInformatics, Chris Palasteri, Kathy Cox, Tim Broering, Tim Ninke, Jerry Harrell. Who is that? Oh, Syntec, Lawrence Jones. Myself, there's Lawrence again. All right. I know there's a few of you on this call who aren't on this list. So is there anybody I should add in my invites going out this weekend?
Should Danny and myself be there?
No.
No file for you.
We might want to add Patty.
Okay. Anyone else? Last chance. I'll never grant access again after today. I'm kidding. Okay, I'll add Patty.
All right, thank you.
All right, let's jump back to our installer. We never like to install things on the C drive on a MedInformatix application server. It is a terrible practice. I've probably said this before. However, this particular server was ported from an Azure server that everything was on the C drive, and so I'm going to leave it like this. I'm not going to change this, but you know, as usual, you know, try to look at your MedInformatix application components and databases on anything other than a C drive in practice. All right, now comes the IP and machine name, IP address or machine name screen, where we pop in our IP address. You know, I think Mitch, you had numerous comments on MI Central recently about being able to use machine names, and this is a place where I could put in Mad Max if I wanted to, or I could put in, oh, I don't remember the domain, but in theory I could do madmax.medinformatics.com. So I could put in FQDN as well. FQDN is a fully qualified domain name. So from the services perspective, we can use IP and machine names. And the MedInformatix client, of course, for a number of years now, has been able to accept a machine name as well. I'm going to stick with IP. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, they both have to be the same though, right? In other words, if you use the machine name for server, then you have to use it for client and vice versa?
I don't think so. Because so each of them has its own. I mean, if you use a machine name, it's just resolving against DNS. Now, from a consistency perspective, though, sure, you should pick. I would say you should pick one and stick with it. But you know, on the client side, if you wanted to use a machine name and you wanted to do an IP here, I don't see it. I don't see it being a big problem as long as the machine name that you use, it matches against the IP that you use. So, but be consistent when you can. Pick one or pick the other. Okay, I'm going to select my task server environment. I'll just put it on ONC 2015. I'm going to leave all these ports how they're set. There are still registry entries on this computer that have the port settings from these services, and so these aren't exactly all of the default ports. But the point is that these installers write these settings out to a registry so that when I come around and have to update the next time with a new version, we don't have to type all this stuff in again, which has not been the case like in the past with specifically the new crop service, which is annoying at best and problematic at worst. For the Waystar service, it wants you to point it to a zermed.ini. So we left that ini named like that because it's just embedded all through the application, and the users never see zermed.ini. So when we went through and did our renaming to Waystar services, we left zermed.ini as is. And so I've got a zermed ini, pretty sure, I'm just going to free type it here, sitting in the root medinfo folder. But your zermed ini is the file that has all of the connection information, URL. It's got the authentication key in it for the token for establishing authenticated connectivity out to the API. And all of that gets read and then written into an XML configuration file for the Waystar service. So we're eliminating our reliance on the zermed ini. So click on Next. We're ready to go. Click on Install. Elevate. So it installs all the services. It goes through and starts all of the services. It pops up each one of these little windows here. You don't have to do anything with them. Just wait for them to go away. I think Glory did this because a couple of the services were obstinate and didn't want to start through the standard methods, and so she just wrote little scripts to force stop any service that might be running and then force start it. So they all went away, and then once it completed that process of getting all the services started, it moved into our completed screen, and we click on finish, and it closes. So now if we go back to our service panel, let me just do a refresh on this. We see a number of new services installed. The new crop task service, there's IMO, there's the med rest service. They're all running. I don't know why this notification status tracker is that actually. Oh, that's unrelated. That's for MI Notify. there's the task service right there. All right, so all of our services were installed and are running. And so since we're on the server, let's go ahead and install our client components as well. And so that's the MedInformatix Client Services installer. The process is nearly identical in terms of the UI experience. One thing I want to point out is even with this complete installer, we created the ability for it to be scripted and run silently. So there is that just like a one-page document in that folder that's on Evolution that gives you the parameters. I was also in the process of porting that over to resources under service installation, giving you the general syntax for installing an MSI through MSI exec, and then laying out the service parameters all below that for each of the individual services. And the last thing I'm going to do on this is drop in a complete example using this general syntax right here and these parameters of what a scripted install would look like for the entire package. But we'll go through it manually for now on the front end. I feel like I should have probably taken a screenshot of the server install page that had all the ports on it, because I actually don't know in what state each of those was before I uninstalled them, and so we'll see if I get stuck walking through the process. Go ahead.
I took one.
You're the man, Patrick. Now, if I didn't have that, I would just go. I'd need to go back and I'd look at the config file for each of those services and pull the port out of it. But Patrick, you can act as my guide, and if the ports don't match up, you can correct me on them. All right. So this is the MedInformatix Client Services setup, and it's got a similar but slightly different set of components. There are two required components for this. Both of these are kind of future use things because the regular MI installer currently installs these as well. But the first one is the Chromium browser. The Chromium browser is slowly replacing our dependence on Internet Explorer in the client application. So we don't like having to rely on Internet Explorer, and we do like that we'll be able to rely on a standardized version of Chromium browser, just like every other major browser seems to be doing now, including Microsoft with their recently released Edge browser, which is Chromium based now. I've been using it, side note, I've been using it on their dev channel for a good 8 months now, and I got to say that it's quite good and quite stable and pretty darn fast. So if you haven't checked out Edge, I shunned the regular Edge for its entire existence until Microsoft made this change, but it's pretty good now. I stay away from Chrome at all possible costs. All right, enough of that. PDF Exchange is the next required component. So both of these get installed into the MedInfo client folder. So again, these are just setting up for the release when the MedInfo client is included in this well, and we can get away from the miclient.exe executable that we run off of the server and that requires lots of user interaction to complete. All of the optional components sit in the MedInfo client branch at the bottom. And we've got the Good ID client, we've got the IMO client, we've got the New Crop RX client, we've got the SQL call client, and that's for the companion to the remote SQL service on the server side, and that's what drives the topic that I've been discussing broadly so far, and that is moving the large data set SQL queries outside of the net services. And then last but not least is the Waystar client. I don't like to put these in the same folder that have the server services have, so I am just going to add a client to the end of that MedInformatix. I'll hit next. I'll drop in the IP address. And Patrick, you want to spot check these ports for me real quick? I think they look the same, but why don't you confirm for me real quick?
Let's see, Good ID is good, IMO is good, New Crop is good, Remote SQL is good, and Waystar is good.
Okay. And then we have these two local ports on here. And what these are doing is both Good ID and IMO, which call two web pages hosted in AWS for that interaction. They have local services that get installed on the client that handle the passing of that data from a web page to the MI client. So that's what those two things are right there. And local is the keyword. Those are local ports. And then we have this little visual artifact here with this above this 9999. That's thanks to my screen again. But what this is set browser emulation. This checkbox and this setting have existed in the New Crop client for many years, ever since we introduced the EPCS functionality originally with Verizon. And the reason we did that was because when you integrate Internet Explorer to an application, it defaults to IE7 mode, which means it defaults to circa like 2005 web compatibility, and it does not play nice at all with HTML5 standards. And this little setting right here sets something called, it says set browser emulation, even though you can't see it all right here, but it sets the browser emulation for the MI client to default to 9999, which is IE9 edge mode, which offers compliance with modern browser standards without breaking anything that you've already done. I've played with this a little bit and have set it to 11,001, which is IE11 edge mode. But it's okay to leave it at 9999. Eventually, this will become not needed and irrelevant once we've migrated completely over to the Chromium browser. We won't need to bother with these registry settings that tell Windows what version of IE to run or what emulation mode of IE to run for the MedInformatix application. Now, if you've installed any of these services in the past individually, you know there used to be a test button here, and you have to click on test in order for next to appear. I asked Glory to get rid of that and just test on next, right? So just take away a click for me, please, and scan all these ports for the services when I click on next, and if they're good, let me go, and if they're bad, if they can't connect, tell me. So if everything's correct here, and if all the services are running when I click on next, I'll get to this page. And so in that little span of time, we just confirmed that all these services are in fact up and running. So Patrick, thanks for confirming those ports were good. And I'll go ahead and click on install now. Oh, interesting. I don't know what this means. I don't think I've ever seen this. I'm going to cross my fingers and ignore it. These services use COM+, and so perhaps when I uninstalled the individual services, it didn't clear out all of the registry entries. So with any luck, we'll be good. We see it went through and started the local services, and I didn't see any errors pop up there, and we've now hit the completed screen. So click on Finish. Jump into our service control panel. I'll hit refresh, and we should have a couple of new services show up. IMO client and Good ID client. Something else just popped in there. Now, there is no, for today's topic, for SQL call service, there is no actual service that gets installed. What actually happens is it installs a DLL in the MedInfo client folder that tells the MedInfo client that SQL call is installed, and it basically activates the calls to the remote SQL on the application service. Now, myself and others like John Krivak have asked our to be able to know, like through the MI client or even in the license manager, to know if a client has these components installed. And so we are working on getting that done. So I'm showing you right now how to physically inspect on a particular MedInfo client to see if SQL call is installed. And the presence of this DLL all by itself means that it is. And what happens when we, I'm repeating myself now, but when we launch the client, which I'll do right now, it's detecting the presence of this SQL call DLL all by itself. There's no switches, there's no checkboxes, there's nothing I need to turn on per se. I'll log in, I'll use the right password, and it's launched. So I know, because I've got a little bit of experience with this, that it's using that service now, and that when I launch something like the master list, that it's going to use that and not use the net services. And if I had, 1,000 appointments in here, this screen should load faster or slightly faster than it would if it was using the net services. And if I was doing this over a wide area network, it would load even faster, because if you've ever experienced an unoptimized fat client on across a WAN, even at like 100 gig connection, I'm sorry, 100 meg connection, it's still pretty slow. Once you get to 200 or more, it starts to behave a little more normal. So everything that's let's see if I can, I don't know why I just opened the imaging inbox. Everything that is a view, either on our toolbar here on the left or through the views menu up at the top, just about all of this, not quite all of it, we do have a listing, has been ported over to SQL REST service. An error occurred while retrieving data. Please provide the following information to your support department. Unknown server error. Well, that's a generic message that I don't know what to do with.
Does it write to the MW client debug file if debugging is enabled?
Let's take a look at that because I think I've got it on all the time. Strange though that that popped up on orders, but not on. Oh, there we go. So it's popping up on the appointment list. Let me just click on one more thing before we go look at that. Let's take a look at messages. I don't know why I keep clicking on imaging inbox. All right, that's screen loaded. Let's go take a look at that. So we'll do a little live troubleshooting here. And I seem to be having some, at the same time, some bandwidth issues. Starting to look like a breakout screen. If any of you are old enough to remember that video game. Okay, this is not good. I don't know if you saw that small message pop up just a second ago, but that was GoToMeeting reporting a bandwidth issue. There we go. Seems to be back. Sort of back, but not quite. Patrick, you asked that question. Have you played around with this at all? This particular service?
No, I have not.
Oh, this is almost unbearable. Not almost, actually unbearable. This is a good opportunity to remind everyone that we've moved the debug files into their own log folders in the MedInfo client folder of the user profile, so they no longer hang out in the MedInfo client root and clutter that up. So they're organized in here, and they also we also have a cleanup mechanism that doesn't let them sit around for more than 3 days. Or when you turn off debug mode, this is all in the release notes for 7.7, I think it was. So that you don't inadvertently leave PHI laying around in a debug file and not realize it. Well, this demonstration was supposed to end with, all right, it's been installed successfully. Your users will not notice a difference other than observing potentially that certain screens load faster, but instead, as we run out of time here, we have to debug over a painfully slow connection. If this goes on much longer, I'll probably go ahead and wrap up the call, stop the recording, and continue to figure this out, and then come back to you all with a final outcome. I do need to understand why what's happening right now just happened. All right, I can't bear this any longer, and you're probably getting there as well. So I'm going to troubleshoot outside this. At least I was able to give you the background on the SQL call and SQL remote. So I'll get this figured out and give you an update on MI Central. So sorry about that. Never impressive to end.
Just the main reason I was asking is I like to, people will come to, what SQL's getting run, and sometimes I'll just go straight to the debug file, so I can see what SQL's being run in a certain screen when you hit refresh or whatever. So,
to answer your
like
general question, if
it's going to be in here still, or if I start need.
Yeah, to answer your general question, so logging still occurs. It just just redirecting the query outside of the net services. So I see what you were asking right now is, will I still have access to seeing SQL in a debug log when I'm using this? And the answer is yes.
Okay, cool.
I think what I'll end up doing actually is we'll just might even continue where I've left off here. So because I do need to be able to show this to you all working and explain to you what happened, so that should it happen again, you all have some troubleshooting techniques. Mitch, I know you had installed it, I think, right? But you hadn't observed any noticeable differences on your platform? You still here, Mitch?
As far as the SQL remote,
Yeah.
it actually slowed down. That's why I was wondering if it needed to be installed on the DB server instead of the app server. Whenever I would run the installation manually locally, it would I always use the orders for labs because they've got like 2,000 or 3,000 unfinished labs.
Okay.
And when I ran that list, it took it about 8 seconds to come up. And then when I uninstalled the remote client, it went back to about 3 or 4 seconds. So it actually slowed it down on the client side.
Interesting.
For mine.
Do you have to?
But again,
go ahead.
I did not install the server side on the database server. I installed it on the app server.
Right.
I may have screwed up, and if I was supposed to, I'm not sure if I was supposed to install the server side on the database server directly or on the app server.
I mean, you could, however, even if the app server communicates with the database server too through the net services. So, you should not have seen that, regardless of which server you install it on. So I guess it would be an interesting exercise if you had, 30 minutes of time to install it on the DB server and see if that has if there's anything different in your environment that would change that. Because the screen that takes 4 seconds to load through the Nest services should take, obviously, the goal would be, and the expectation would be for it to take less than 3 or 4 seconds. It should be 1 to 2 seconds, for a couple thousand rows.
Right.
So
I'll play with that when I get a chance on the. I'll move it to the other.
did you uninstall it?
On the client side, I did.
Okay.
Again, the other issue was with, of course, because we've got like hundreds of clients. I've only run it on the tests on my local box.
Okay.
Because when I tried to install it, even on my local box using the command line, and again, that's why I've asked for a sample of the command line install commands, the structure, because I may be doing that wrong, because it doesn't work at all when I use the command line. So I noticed that you look like you had a file out there somewhere with a sample structure for setting up the silent installations.
Yeah, I had shared at some point an actual example. I think it might have been a new crop example that we use, today, and have been using in some applications to deploy new crop silently. So it's the same approach, just different service.
Right. I was using the QNIP address, so I may need to change it to endpoint, because maybe that's what I've been breaking it unintentionally.
I don't know. I mean, I think of you as a pretty technical person, but I think I do remember seeing your case comments on that, covering a variety of topics. So I would like to circle back on that and see if we can get it running there properly.
That'd be great.
And then again, share back to this group, what we did and how we did it, because it's meant to improve performance, not slow performance for the sake of getting it out of the net services. So, all right. Well, I've got some work to do here. Unfortunately, I have a little bit of time to do it before we adjourn for today. Does anyone have any final questions or comments on any subject, not just this one? Anything you want to ask before we adjourn for today?
Does it install, like if we have the current Good ID service installed, will we have to uninstall it to run the entire, the complete package? Like I guess either on the server side or on the client side?
So ideally, yes.
Okay.
I talked with Gloria about that. She maintains our MSIs, and I said, what about systems that already have IMO or Good ID installed? And we actually ran through it, and it created a second instance of the service, which to me is not ideal. But the installer, because all of the new installers are generally unaware of the old ones, that they can't manage it, or they don't know how to manage it. So that's why I want to move us as quickly as possible to this complete installer, so that we don't run into too many issues like that. So,
Right.
so basically, Patrick, I would recommend that, especially if you can do it through automation, which you can, you uninstall the individual Good ID and then reinstall it, which you can do through MSI exec, and then reinstall it with the complete installer.
Yeah, I've come up with a batch file that we have clients run that will try and uninstall any previous version of the new crop,
Right.
and Good idea, and then install the new one. So
okay. And just as a reminder, with the current set of MSIs that are all the ones that Gloria wrote, they do offer in-place updating, so it does not require uninstalling first. So Patrick, so if your routine is able to manually uninstall the old services that were written by John Shore, the original author, and you were able to bring them up to this tier of installers, then you'd be good going forward with the in-place updates. So basically what the current suite of installers do, they write out entries to the registry about their use and their version, et cetera. And then that's used in maintaining them going forward. Whereas the old ones knew nothing about, any prior routine.
Hey, Chris.
They were pretty sloppy. Yes. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. If he's using the MSI exec/uninstall for those, I had to get mine to work right. I had to make sure that those were, of course, at the top of the batch.
Yes.
And then also put a timeout of a couple of seconds in between that and the installation to make sure it didn't accidentally overlap.
Okay.
Yep.
I might have done the same thing in the little one I wrote, was had a delay in between them. Also making sure that the uninstall line was referencing the MSI or MSIs that you want it to uninstall, like the older versions, because you can't reference a new. Sounds kind of confusing, but I think you'll get it. You can't reference a new version of an MSI to uninstall an older version of it with the way that the original ones were written. So you had to be careful with the way you retain them for uninstall. Okay, sounds like nobody else has any questions for today, so I'll go ahead and adjourn. And when I get the poll question up for switching to 9 o'clock Pacific, noon Eastern, or every week, just give me your yay or nay vote if you can, and I will talk with you all next week.
Thanks bunches.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.